I'm kind of glad on this movie that I got to direct it and I didn't have to play a hobbit, because, you know, those guys had a fairly arduous time of it. They had to get up at some unearthly hour.
How lucky are we to be in New Zealand to see this? That's half of why this movie is so amazing. This kind of stuff, every day. My day would start within the 5 o'clock hour, every day. For the most part. It's sometimes 4:30. That was lovely. The Hobbits would always start early because we had the prosthetics in the morning. Our makeup took mostly about 2 hours.
Glue was painted to the bottom of your feet. Then you would slide into these prosthetic feet. They would then hair dry glue around the seams of your feet and paint them with airbrushes and paintbrushes.
Standing up at 5 in the morning. And the whole time we're begging to sit down, but they don't let us.
They couldn't sit and have their feet glued on because the way that their ankles would sort of be bent in the wrong position. So they had to literally just stand up when I'm sure they'd rather be in bed.
We have to be really honest and say that when the days that we don't have feet, we're really excited. Because A, that means we have a later call, and B, we don't have to stand up for an hour and a half.
I don't think my wife knows as much about my feet as Sean Foote. And isn't that ironic that Sean's last name is Foote? F-O-O-T-E, Sean Foote. O-E?
No E.
No E. I want to put an E on there because it's just too weird that your last name is Foote and that you work on my foot. My foots. No E.
So the prosthetics would be put on, and that would be an interesting time in the morning. It was always kind of, it was our time to be with each other. We went through phases as well. There was the kind of reading phase, where we'd all be reading and we wouldn't talk.
Then other times we'd be really into music and the CD would be blaring and everything would be up, you know, just different kind of moods that everybody went through.
Every morning I bring a book about this big. Pick about 3 CDs to listen to because I'm here for so bloody long. And then we'd go on to the makeup chair, get our wig and our ears put on. So the Hobbit ears actually encompass the entire ear and kind of fit on like, well, like a glove.
Like an earmuff.
Like an earmuff, but completely contoured for the ear.
The thing that's weird about the ears is, in terms of acting, is they're foam, latex, and so they actually absorb sound. And when other actors are performing, and sometimes it's hard to hear them.
And then, you know, maybe we'd get our rewrites, because often, literally every day, the script was being rewritten.
So anything that we'd learned the previous night made no sense because we would have revised script pages. I would say probably 90% of the time we arrived on set.
Not because we were in trouble in any sense, but it was really to get as close to Tolkien as possible, and I think we were always trying to incorporate more of Tolkien into the movie.
I actually have a whole miniaturized script so that if I want to see like where we've come from or where we're going to, and we have other notes and stuff, but it's really neat just to be able to have something to walk around in, and when Peter's talking about stuff and you can kind of, I don't know, it's just a useful tool.
If there was time, we'd nip and get some breakfast. Sometimes there wouldn't be time, there'd be a rush on, so we'd get breakfast brung to you. I'd normally have porridge. In fact, I don't think there was porridge on set until I kind of asked for it, and then there was always a big thing of porridge. So I think I kept everyone healthy on set because of that.
The day has now begun. I'm now completely transformed into a hobbit. All that I have left is to put on my wardrobe. So I've got my feet, got my wig, got my ears, got my dirt. I'm ready to go. I think I'll go in my trailer now, listen to a little music, relax, and get ready for the scene.
If you ever actually made it to set, that's the thing about making movies, is it is such a cliche, but it's so true. Everybody rushes because you have to be there in front of the camera when it's ready to go. But if something goes wrong, you know, a light goes or need to reset something, then it could be another 5 hours. As we were filming the movie, there was a making of that was always going on, so there was normally a camera on set. And, you know, if we were ever really bored being hanging around to do a shot for a while, we'd try to do a little skit.
The phone rang last night, and there was someone on the other end.
It is that thing where you get so used to each other's company and so comfortable with each other that some of the things that you're getting up to keep yourself entertained just start to become a little bit off-center. So this Elijah guy, you know this Elijah Wood guy?
Yeah.
Have you spoken to him?
Yeah, a couple of times.
I was speaking to him today, and he's just being a real idiot.
He's a prick.
Hey!
Hey!
How are you? Sit down, man.
How are you?
Hey, good,
This
good.
party seems cool. Isn't it?
Elijah Wood!
Hey, I've got a present for
Down,
you.
Monahan.
I've got a present for you.
A present?
Yeah.
What for?
Oh, just for, yeah. Nothing.
Yeah?
Just something I picked up.
You deserve one, man.
That's cool. You guys rule.
I'm gonna go and get it now.
All right.
See ya.
He is a fucking.
Next time, I'm gonna punch him right in the
I already did that to him the other day, man.
Yeah?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
He fucking cried as well. He's like,
Hey, mate!
Hey!
hey, what's going on?
Got an apple?
Hey.
Hey, you guys. I've never met friends like you before on a set.
Shut up.
No, honestly, I mean it.
Nah, I would agree with that as well.
You know about my apples?
Never been so close to
No.
two people in my life.
Yeah.
You know about my apple? Who is that? Be an extra.
I have no idea.
He's jabbering all the time. I
I
sat
know.
down, talking to you, trying to run my lines.
Right.
Jabba, jabba, jabba. I
Yeah,
was
constantly trying to
like,
interrupt.
and I'm busy with.
Hey,
boy.
what's going on?
Billy boy.
Hey, how are you?
Hey,
All right.
Billy boy.
So we need to get back up in a minute or two, I think.
Were we going back
Yeah,
up?
I think so.
I can't wait to do this scene with you.
Yeah. We'll have fun, eh?
You're just so giving.
I think that's us.
All right, come on, let's go.
I remember once, me and Dom were doing this thing. Just bored, you know, we're out in location. And he says, how fast do you think you could touch every table in this canteen? It's just me and him. And I was like, I reckon I could do it faster than you anyway.
The game that Billy played more than anything was to watch me run around and touch the tables and then to forget to have started the stopwatch and just watch me get more tired, you know, and the time's going longer and longer and just laughing and giggling to himself.
And then I go to do it. And as I'm running around, my foot comes off, you know, and flies off. I need to go and tell Weta that my foot's come off. And just at that, they say, okay, you're needed on set. And I've got this foot, you know, it's going to take like half an hour to put on. You just feel like an idiot.
Of course, the biggest crime I could commit as a director was to have their feet glued on, but then, because of the angles I was shooting that day, to somehow not see the feet. Sean Astin in particular kept a running tally, and by the time he was finished, a 274-day shoot, he could tell me exactly how many days he'd had his feet glued on and they weren't photographed.
50 separate days. We got to 50 that we had the feet applied when they weren't actually even seen on camera. In terms of the actual work itself, Peter would wait until we were all sort of present and he'd sort of talk us through things.
And then then it's down, and then Billy says, "Oh, look, Mary, it's Frodo."
Hobbits are small. They tend to be about 4 feet tall. 3'6" is kind of the average height of a hobbit. Obviously, we're not that size, so there was an interesting logistical issue with making us that size. And it wasn't one trick. There were a variety of things that we did to accomplish that final goal of the size difference between the hobbits and the rest of the characters. We had scale doubles, for one, and we, as the hobbits, had to direct them, which is interesting. So come up, run, and then just sort of, you know, maybe plant your front foot out there and just sort of settle yourself down with that as a bit of a, you know, the little tiny details that made up kind of a simple performance for us. We had to kind of work them out with the scale doubles. And that was required of us pretty much every day. Brilliant. Thank you, Kieran.
The most complicated things were probably false perspective, whereby if I were to be doing a scene with Ian McKellen, he would be in the foreground of the shot so that he would just look bigger, you know, because he'd be closer to the lens, and I would be back from the shot, but we would make out that we were level with each other.
Amazingly simple in the sense that it is literally just one person in the foreground, one person in the background.
We'll look at the eyes. Elijah will be roughly down here. He's not directly opposite you. He's a bit lower, a bit further down the table. He's over here.
But also logistically for us as actors, that posed the problem of eyeline.
From the hand of Sauron himself. No, don't look at me. Sauron himself.
because we couldn't look at each other during the 2 shots, which is a weird thing because you rely so much on the other actor's eyes when you're acting. It's important to have that connection, and we didn't have that connection for those kind of shots. And then there was also blue screen. Here we go, and action! And that was incredibly complicated, and I was really nervous because I was like, this feels really weird. I'm walking on, you know, a blue mat, and there's blue around me, and there's no reference at all to remind me of the place that I'm supposed to be.
Did it look all right? Yeah, you can use a little bit of width down here.
Down here.
Once you're down the step.
There's a scene with Gandalf and Frodo in Bag End when Frodo gets up from the table and says, you know, we'll hide the ring and no one will ever find it. And suddenly I had to kind of remember my marks, hit a mark at a specific place at a specific time so that it matched the timing of the shot that they got with Ian. No one knows it's here, do they? Do they, Gandalf?
Probably the most frustrating thing for me was working on my knees.
This is probably, I mean, the configuration with Billy and Dom is not quite right because Frodo had a clear access through.
Just the freedom of movement that you have from having your legs, you know, positioned on the ground is a lot freer than having your knees because there's a sense of overbalancing or underbalancing, falling one way or the other.
And so you've got all these kind of different technical and logistic and cinematic tricks going on in your head, but at a certain point, you have to just kind of squeeze that out of your mind and remember what the story is, and remember what your character is, and have a profound emotional interaction with your imagination on camera.
I think I'm getting the hang of this.
We'd wrap generally at about 8 o'clock.
Birthday boys are going to Alcove tonight, so if anyone wants to join us.
Where's that? What town's that?
It's in Hamilton.
Hamilton.
Yep.
The drinks are on the line, yeah!
There goes my per diem!
For the year.
So I hope to see people there. That would be lovely.
We had to take off our costume, then go into makeup and have our ears taken off and our wigs, which took about 40 minutes. And then have our feet taken off, which took close to about an hour, you know, in kind of soapy water with people hacking away at your feet with brushes and metal sticks and pipe cleaners and toothpicks and all that kind of stuff.
Once the feet were off, if it was a Friday, we might have a beer as well, which is nice. You sit there with a beer, somebody rubbing your feet. Come on, does it get any better? I don't think so.
That's a typical day in the life of a hobbit on Lord of the Rings.
One of the most nervous aspects of the cast coming together was the fact that they'd never met each other before. That, you know, we'd gone around the world and we'd picked the best people for each of the roles individually. Met them, auditioned them, whatever, offered them the role, they'd accepted the role. We were happy, but the unknown thing was that none of them had worked together before. Most of them had never even met each other before. So there was a very nervous moment when suddenly we're in New Zealand 6 weeks out from the shoot and everybody starts getting off the plane.
When I was getting ready to go out, they said, when you get to Heathrow, you'll be travelling with someone called Orlando Bloom.
I just left my family behind and my friends and my life, and I was like feeling a little bit teary, you know, at the idea of leaving everything behind and my dog and everything. And
I see this guy, you know, and I thought, he looks elf-like.
And this wee fella walked over and he said,
You wouldn't be Orlando Bloom, would you? He said, Billy!
And I was like, oh my God, you're a hobbit. And we just had this huge embrace.
And it was my birthday as well. I'd just turned 30 that day. So we had champagne on the flight. And then when we got to LA, because of the time difference, it was my birthday again. So we had more champagne, you know, because it's the 28th again.
Pete had done something very intelligent whereby at the start of filming it was the full hobbits for about 2 months, primarily, just us, no one else.
And I really hoped that those 4 guys would bond because one, it would make the 15 months go a lot quicker if everybody was friendly. and got along. But also for the film, I knew that, you know, having the hobbits sort of feeling like they really were connecting was something that was important for the movie.
So I didn't know anyone, and there's always that fear of going to a new place in uncharted territory.
I was there for best part of a year. So it was my life for a year, totally away from home, just making new friends.
It's such an adventure. You don't know who anyone is. Everybody's trying to find their feet and interact and try and be sociable. And that was one of the great things, that these friendships formed with the unlikeliest of people.
It was a real kind of Boy Scout kind of, you know, year and a half. It was men together. I mean, you know, every so often Liv would be there and Kate Blanchett would be there, which is such an amazing thing because you've got these two gorgeous women who got so much attention from us guys because, you know, we adored them so much.
Well, I remember being really nervous because I felt like a lot of the emphasis, because it was all the boys, was on them meeting me in a way, and I was so nervous to meet them. And when I think about how I saw them, it's completely different to how I see them now, but they're all so cute.
And it was this amazing kind of coming together. Here we are, we're all finally here, or almost all of us, and we're gonna set out on this journey. And it was this incredible excitement and anticipation for what we were about to do together.
One of the amazing things about Elijah, I think, is he can sleep anywhere at any time. I mean, I've seen him do it. And, like, if they don't go back to him for, like, 15 minutes, he'll just be sitting there like that, like, for 15 minutes. And then someone will go, Elijah, yeah, yep, scene, right. And he goes. It's an incredible thing that he's got. I mean, he must have been so tired during that shoot because, you know, there was times when we had time off. Elijah pretty much had no time off, ever.
I've seen him fall down 3 sets of staircases, like, and then just get up and go, and just walk off. That is an incredible gift, man. He's like, you know, like Chaplin.
I sort of appointed myself as his kind of minder. You know, I wanted to look after him and make sure that he was okay.
Sean was very much Sam for me, you know, always looking after me, being there for me.
He kept locking his keys in his apartment, and he'd leave and he couldn't get back in. And I was like, well, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And I would arrange, you know, to have a locksmith brought out there and you know, get his keys. And so he could continue going about having whatever fun he was having, you know, or talking to who he was talking to. And 45 minutes later, I bring him his keys, and Elijah, here's your keys. And he was like, oh, wow, great, thanks, you know, thanks for taking care of it. I saw the need for life to imitate art. Sam needed to look after Frodo as his sort of primary identity. As the Fellowship started to coalesce, that was the job I carved out for myself.
Sean Astin is just a very cool man. He had a different experience than the rest of us hobbits because he's got a family, of course. He was there with his wife Christine and his beautiful daughter Ali, who we were all uncles to her at the end, you know.
Sean is a very kind of untrusting individual when it comes to safety. He's gonna hate me for saying this, but it's true. He always had to check out everybody else's job and make sure that they were doing their job properly because he didn't necessarily trust that they had it all under control. And there was one such instance when we were in a helicopter and we were in a kind of treacherous mountain area. It wasn't easy to land and it wasn't easy to take off.
Elijah, Billy and I were just having so much fun because we were in helicopters and we were saying to the guy, could you try and flip over, or could you do some banks, or, you know, how close could you get to that mountain? And, you know, if we put a bike down, could you pick it up by its wheels and all that kind of stuff?
And they're talking and laughing and scratching, and I can see that, like, all 3 helicopters are making their way in, and ours is the first one to go, or second one to go. And I'm like, you guys, shut up. They're talking. They're like, Sean, and they know what they're doing. They're safe. And I'm like, oh, man, this is not good.
And Sean immediately starts, like, drilling the pilot of the helicopter. Like, all right, do you know that you've got, like, 2 guys behind you waiting to come in? Do you know, are you cool to, like, take off? And asking him all of these kind of safety questions that I'm sure this pilot had completely under control.
And there was also a point where Elijah and I and Billy and Sean had been dropped off at lower altitude, and we were there for about half an hour waiting for a helicopter to pick us up. And we were throwing stones at trees and running around and, you know, having fun. Sean was about 100 yards away from us, and he was directing helicopters into land.
You see, you got 2 behind you.
Hey, Bon, Come on in.
You know, waving to the helicopter guy, you know, pointing out where the other guys were, and they're waving at me, and the hobbits were all making fun of me because I was, like, trying to be Mr., you know, involved.
Billy Boyd's a unique guy. I'm so just blessed to have met him, you know.
Dom's an idiot. No, Dom's great. I was probably closest with Dom because, you know, we had so much stuff together.
Done and done.
I was involved in a close near-death experience, really. It was kind of traumatic. We were filming this scene where the hobbits run to the Brandywine Bridge and get on the ferry. And we were rehearsing, running very fast as we could down this wooden bridge and then jumping onto the ferry.
And then in one of the times, as we ran down to get to the ferry, Dom got a wooden splinter through his foot.
An amazingly tough splinter, I think probably made of titanium.
You think somebody cut his leg off? The sweat was pouring off him.
You know, like every time I put pressure on my foot, it was just an excruciating pain, like going up my foot.
I thought he was going to pass out at one point, and everybody thought it was something really, really kind of serious.
And I was saying to all the boys, I was saying to Elijah and Sean and Billy, I said, you've got to come over and see them take this splinter out because it's going to be a whopper, you know. It's going to be like this big, and I'm going to get it framed.
And they take out this tiny splinter, and I was like, I cannot believe you made that fuss over that splinter.
I kept the splinter, still got it.
So after that, whenever, like, Dom did something, he'd start sweating. If anything happened, is it a splinter? Are you okay? And he'd be like, "Rrr."
We had a hiccup in the casting process because another actor had been cast in the role of Aragorn, and we just came to a realization that we had cast the role a little too young. It caused us a lot of headaches because we were now shooting the film, we couldn't stop shooting it, and we only had a very limited number of days that we could shoot without the character of Aragorn.
I got a phone call at home saying, do you want to get on a plane tomorrow to go to New Zealand? And I said, for what? And then they said, you know, the Lord of the Rings.
I knew that this was a very, very important conversation, that he'd never met me before, he didn't know who I was, I'd never met him, he'd never been to New Zealand before, he hadn't read the Lord of the Rings.
I just said, well, can I think about it for a minute? He said, well, not very long, you know, but you have till this afternoon.
And we somehow had to try to persuade him to take this role because we thought he would be really great, and we badly wanted him now in this movie. You know, we were in a real bind.
And I hung up the phone, and my son was with me there. He says, what was that about? Was that Lord of the Rings? I said, yeah, they're making a movie out of it. And he knew the story. You know, I didn't. And
I know that the person we really have to thank for persuading Viggo was his son, Henry. Because Henry was about, I think he was about 11 or 12 years old at that time, and he was a huge fan of The Lord of the Rings and absolutely was beside himself when he thought that his dad could get to play Aragorn.
You know, so it was nice to have his blessing, you know what I mean?
Most times that you're with Viggo, something amazing is not too far behind. He's like an old-fashioned movie star in my eyes, you know, very gentlemanly and very polite and, you know, very concentrated in his art. You know, in a word, I would describe Viggo as being very inspiring.
Being the natural leader of this group of actors in the Fellowship came very easily to him.
Well, he was always doing things like, you know, like he'd get all the Kieran, you know, and pretend to throw him over the edge of the mountain.
You can see the wildness in his eyes. He goes slightly mental. Something kind of clicks.
And then he just rugby tackled me for some reason, you know, really, like, bang. Go, I wondered what had hit me, you know, and what are you doing, you know? He's an extraordinary guy, really. I mean, he believes in the truth in everything he does, I think, you know, no matter what it is. And if he doesn't do it.
He's an incredible artist in so many different forms.
Photography and painting and poetry, and he just lives for the moment, it seems. He lives for life.
Viggo is an incredible photographer, and he took a lot of photographs throughout the whole time. And, you know, you sit at your little makeup station and there's a mirror in front of you. And he just, from the beginning, day one, started to, you know, make a collage all around the outsides of the mirror. And by the end of the shoot, there was no mirror left.
They were overlapping. It was full of pictures, and then it became another layer and another layer.
It's all the way up on the ceiling and wrapping around behind and trickling onto our mirrors. And he was thinking of, like, you know, buying the bus and taking it with him, because it was such a brilliant collage of memories and moments.
He doesn't just act the character. He has to somehow become part of the character. He and the character have to blend. And Vigo, I think, saw his sword as being the key into his character. And as a result, he didn't really want to go anywhere without his sword. I know there were restaurants he'd go and eat in at the end of a day shooting, where he'd carry his sword and he'd put it by the table as he was eating. He wouldn't drive anywhere in his car without the sword being in the back seat.
I was on the way out of a Sunday rehearsal. When I was walking out of the gym, all sort of sweaty, half in street clothes and half in airborne clothes, waving the sword around, trying to keep a mental picture of what we'd just done, sort of, I guess, walking down the street, down to where my car was parked on a Sunday afternoon. Waving the sword around and looking like, this sort of desperate Rasputin character to them, probably. Cop cars conversed on me. There'd been some report.
The interesting mix that John put on the thing was that he's not a big fan of rehearsing too much for fight scenes. And his method would be to say to the stunt guys, "How many of you are coming towards me?" And they'd say, 6. And he'd say, "Okay, who's first?" And the guy would go, "I'm first." And he'd go, "Okay, you come at me and I'll hit you with my axe, and then you come and I'll hit you, and you come and he would just take these guys out. And the stunt guys would, tough guys, big tough guys, they'd wear a lot of armor. And they'd say, "Okay, John, try and miss us, but if you do hit us, it's not a problem, we don't mind." He would hit every single one of them. Someone would come at him and he'd just bang, bang, bang. And the stuff that they got of John fighting is brilliant, because it's real. The stunt guys are absolutely terrifying. They're just running away from this guy. As you can see, the shots that you're getting are incredible. He just looks on fire, but that is because John was wearing a prosthetic that limited his vision to this, because he had, prosthetic skin, and his eyes were swollen because he was allergic to the prosthetic, so they were slightly shut. And he had no kind of, sideway vision.
I mean, at times you just wanted to rip the damn stuff off and just scratch. Added to which I developed this topical eczema, which meant that basically every time the upper and lower eyelids were attached, I lost all the skin in this area. It was like a skin peel. And within hours then it would swell, and it would turn sort of lobster pink, and then, it would just be covered with lymph. And it was itchy and painful, and one felt very, very self-conscious.
John Rhys Davies took us to a restaurant, and it was when we'd only just started to get to know John, and we sat down at this huge long table, and he said, "I think I will order the food for tonight." And we said, "Oh, okay, on you go, John," and we were all having a conversation, and the waitress came over, and John ordered, food that would probably have fed maybe 35, 40 people, and there were about 12 of us. He just said, "We'll have 9 lobster and 15 shrimp and 12 red snapper, 15 filet mignons and some grilled mushrooms. I'll have 12 onions and wild boar and, all this kind of stuff, just like pheasants and grouse. And do you have partridge? Bring the partridge," all that kind of stuff. And, the brilliant thing about John is that because he's worked with so many amazing people and worked on some great jobs, all you need to do is give him the merest hint that you would like to hear something about a job that he'd done, and he's off.
One of the training regimes that we set up for our actors when they first arrived in New Zealand was boat handling skills, and I think that most of their training revolved around trying to make each other sink.
It grieves me to talk about this, because in a boat situation when there is an elf and there is a dwarf in a training boat, and the boat capsizes. Let us say that the blame was placed on the dwarf.
He's a huge guy, man. He's 3 times the size of me, and his weight was just like, he just needed to like a tiny little moment of the weight, and we were lost.
But there might just have been an element of grim satisfaction in the dwarf's face when he heard of another boating accident which also involved the elf.
I can't believe that John would say that was my fault. Did he really say it was my fault? He's unbelievable, man.
I wasn't very good at the canoes, really. I mean, I could never sort of get that sense to put it over that way, to do a left and all that lot. And I just kept getting lost and having to be towed back in. And Orlando was quite good. He'd practiced a lot more than I had. And he was like, sort of, you know, very graceful. And so any time I could give his canoe a little knock with my oar, I would do, you know. So he's been sent round the wrong way. And it'd say action, he's like, God, it's Bean, he's put my boat in the wrong direction.
I love Orly. I mean, I would pick on him a lot just because I could. I had this thing I refused to drive when we were there because it was on the left side, and I'm a little dyslexic, and I was just terrified. So Orlando lived really close to me, and I would make him drive me around everywhere. And we would spend a lot of time together, and I guess I wanted to watch over him, and, you know, it was his first movie, and that could really mess with some people's heads, going from being a student in film school to being one of the stars of such an enormous film, and so I always took a lot of notice of just what he was doing and not how he was acting or anything, but in his personal life.
Orlando was no more selfish than any of us, but he wasn't always as clever at disguising it as the rest of us, because he's not that experienced, so that if he wanted something, he sort of came out and asked for it. Wiser birds go round the corner and whisper and sidle and to achieve the same effect. So sometimes the old lion had to push down the young cub, but not really, only in fun, because he's such an open guy, and his enthusiasm was so shared by us all.
He's a lively guy, and he's a really good guy, got a good heart. And but we're very different in some ways. I'm from up north, he's from down south, and I call him a southern softy, and he calls me a northern bastard.
Sean Bean, he was a real brother in arms, story-wise, but also actor to actor and man to man. He was a most valuable ally to me. We were doing the sort of scene where I die, and Viggo's sat, laid over me and talking to me. And we sort of did all my shots before lunch, and then we just said like this, all right, that's lunch. We come back to the death scene later. and then we came back after lunch and shot this, all the coverage on Viggo. So it was quite strange, that, because you still, you just break off and have some potatoes and some food and stuff like that, and you go back for your death scene again and die again.
Ian McKellen, when Ian arrived in New Zealand, I showed him a videotape I had with some interviews with Tolkien, and then obviously he got some of those audio tapes that you can get. And Ian based his performance of Gandalf on Tolkien. I mean, he was impersonating Tolkien.
It was looking at myself in the mirror as Gandalf, adjusting the stoop of the shoulders, and in doing that, feeling the voice deepen and getting raspier and a little more precise than perhaps my own is.
And really, in a sense, Tolkien does have, he does have a part in our movie, interpreted through Ian McKellen's performance of Gandalf.
Ian shared our trailer. So if you can imagine the 4 hobbits in a trailer with Ian McKellen.
I was sort of partitioned off. I don't know why. Perhaps it was thought that Gandalf wouldn't want to talk to lesser beings.
There was an entrance at this end of the bus and an entrance at that end of the bus. And when Ian was in the chair, we always used the other entrance out of respect.
But I was rather grateful for having a rather, albeit flimsy, partition, because Elijah Wood in particular Oh, and Dominic Monaghan liked to play music quite loudly early in the morning, and it wasn't always music that was to my taste.
So that became kind of difficult. You know, you'd kind of hear him sort of "Arr!" in the back of the trailer. "Arr!" At one point, just in protesting and some sort of, you can't really figure out what he's saying, but just protesting.
But there was no tension because of it.
He's a very amusing man, great sense of humour, and a very nice man. It's an awful phrase, really, to say that somebody's nice. But when I say nice, I mean he's a very decent person. He's a very fine actor, and he was tremendously supportive, as far as I was concerned, encouraging and a constant companion, you might say.
It's my first opportunity to play with Ian McKellen, whom I've met, but I've never actually worked. I mean, people automatically assume that, you know everybody in Britain. But we've never worked together. And that has been a tremendous joy for me, because he's the most generous of actors. And he works in a way that I like, which is a sort of ensemble way of thinking. In other words, he's not frightened of suggesting things to me and vice versa. And that way, we can combine and work out a scene together.
Ian is a master actor. He has a technique or an approach to film acting which hadn't occurred to me before, in that each time he spoke the lines, it was a slightly different Bilbo that I was working with and reacting to. Because Ian's approach is to willfully make each take different. And so he provided what he called a kaleidoscope of Bilbo for Peter Jackson to eventually look through and shake into whatever configuration he wanted.
One of the great things about Christopher Lee is that he is a huge Tolkien fan. Probably one of the biggest Tolkien fans that I've ever met. He's read Lord of the Rings every year. He reads it once a year and has done so for decades. He actually met Professor Tolkien once. I never had to really talk to him about who and what Saruman was. He just absolutely knows his character inside out, and said to me something very sweet, that it was fulfilling a lifelong ambition of his to be involved in a film of Lord of the Rings, because he has been reading it for so long and waiting for the day that a film would be made, and dreaming that he might possibly be involved in it.
I think I've always rather underestimated Christopher Lee because of the films that he's made, and he'd be the first to say that not all of them are of the highest quality. I certainly haven't seen them all. It's more than 200, isn't it? But I have always been impressed by his physical and vocal authority, and I think he was very well cast.
Meeting Christopher Lee and watching him work on this character was a wonderful experience for me. I mean, I went on, I didn't have days off, but I would run from my set to watch what he was doing sometimes. Having to come in and do Saruman and like, go 0 to 60 now, boom, and you get a quarter mile, and that's all you get, and you better make us believe it. He knows so much about these stories, about this book, and cares so much about it, that he is like an emissary, from the mists, like the ghost of Tolkien on the set.
The famous phrase, Ashnas Gurbatuluk, Ashnas Grimpatul, Ashnas Thrakatuluk, Akburzanishi Kimpatul. One ring to rule them all.
I think Liv Tyler said, this is just the weirdest set in the world, because, there's monsters walking around and wizards, and also, very small people and very tall people, and it was quite a weird thing at first, I suppose, but it became natural, it was your place of work.
I kind of feel bad for Liv, because, her character was such that she wasn't required all the time, and she would come to New Zealand for kind of stints. So she was sort of left out to a certain degree of the kind of camaraderie that we were able to gain and the experiences that we were able to gain as a fellowship, because we were there for basically the entire length of time.
She became our princess. We looked out for her, it was like, it was a boys' movie, and she came in and sort of gave us that element, that female touch, and it was great to have her around.
Someone like Kate Blanchett or Liv Tyler would show up, It's a different quality, a different energy would come to the set, and it affected the way people behaved on the set and the way people acted.
And it was wonderful working with Kate. The image that I most had in mind when I prepared for that scene is when I actually met Julie Christie, possibly the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And it was that impact that I really wanted to try and convey in this scene with Gimli and the Enchantress herself. And it was very easy to do that with Kate, because Kate's got her own beauty and luminous quality herself.
I was really looking forward to working with her, because apart from Lothlorien, I don't really have scenes with her, and that was a scene where we got to speak Elvish together, and it felt really effortless because she was so involved in it and so fluent with the language that it just it transports me when I see it, and it did at the time.
Having actors like Kate Blanchett and Liv Tyler and Hugo Weaving are able and have the power to portray non-humans ethereal. They have an elegance and a beauty.
Hugo's an actor very much like myself, and so we were both of us rather enjoyably out of our normal milieu, and a lot of our off-screen conversation was about being a theatre actor and plays that we'd done or wanted to do. A very congenial, like-minded person who has a wonderful sense of humour, and there's a lot of laughter around when Hugo's there.
Hugo just sort of assumed that role of Elrond with the greatest of ease, you know. I mean, there was I putting all this kind of legwork into creating the character, and I think he just breezed in and made him, you know, he had all the authority of Elrond.
One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie.
We had these scale doubles on the movie that were short people to represent the hobbits for the wide shots.
It's Kieran's birthday, what was it, on Tuesday?
Tuesday,
On
yeah.
Tuesday, it was Kieran's birthday. Look at the chiseled, the etched, the years of experience found on Kieran's face. And later you'll be able to see him wearing all of our faces.
Kieran was the lord of the scale doubles.
The sergeant, you know, the ringleader, the disciplinarian, and he ran a very tight ship.
Kieran, I hear they're going to set you on fire. How do you feel about that?
If it happens, I'll be really happy to do it.
And the person who doubled for me was a girl from Thailand called Fawn, who is just absolutely beautiful. We got on so well. She was talking about wanting to become a stunt woman because she loved all that stuff, except for horses. She hated being on the horse.
This is the best double, right? This is perfect. It's pretty close.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
I was a young 12-year-old boy at the time, and I think they chose him because Martin had this kind of twitchy, kind of nervous energy that I think Mary seemed to have at the start of the movie. He picked it up very quickly and you know, really put a lot into the movie in terms of his physicality. We had to have a very intimate relationship with these people. They had to become us in miniature form, you know.
We had a double for Gimli named Brett, who did all of Gimli's scale work and a lot of his stunt work as well.
4'9.5". Also, I'm a black belt in the martial art.
He already had some problems with his knees, and he really injured himself badly, but just kept going. And anytime you were tired, you know, all you had to do was look at him and what he was accomplishing. He was definitely an inspiration.
Sean Astin's scale double, an Indian guy called BK, speaks with a very strong Indian accent. Kind of talks like that. Hello, how are you doing today? Nice to see you.
He loves red wine and loves chess. You like red? I've got red wine. Yes, man. Fantastic. And he would play. He's awesome at chess.
So he'd be dressed as Sam with a mask of my face. So it was like I was playing a miniature version of myself who was better than me at chess.
Him and Sean would go at it. He'd kick Sean's ass every time. Sean fancied himself a chess player. He'd kick his ass.
I'd take his bishop, and then he'd come and he'd try to take my king, and I'd take his king, and he'd run around and laugh and stuff. Him and Vigo were an amazing team together. They were very funny and they got on very well.
Sandu Suraj na dekh. He can't see the sun and moon.
It was very interesting to see BK shouting at Vigo, you know, get in car, and Vigo go, oh, very sorry, get in the car. And, you know, it was like a mother-hen kind of relationship. Brilliant. And this day we went fishing and he caught a fish and ran in and said, there's a load of salmon and they're all feeding around the shore, so just throw your rod in and you should catch a fish in a couple of minutes. We went back that night and Vigo said, I'm going to cook the fish tonight. And I went into the kitchen and BK's screaming at him, like screaming orders, you know, like, open oven and cook rice and get colander and bring me knife and bring me fork. Vigo's running around going, okay, all right. You know, getting in trouble.
And we sit down, and we've had to clean up his mess and prepare the fish. And we're complimenting him, and rightly so, on his excellent curry. And you know, and he's saying, I know. Yes, it was quite good. And like that. And then I said, what do you think of the fish? And he says, it's okay. You know, like... And then I said, well, you don't like it? And he says, it's not how I would have made it. And I said, well, how would you have made it? I would have made fish curry. I said, well, of course.
We lived, you know, most of it, not together, but we lived in the same city for 15, 16 months, traveling together, late nights together, long hours together, cold weather, everything, all of these elements. And we were doing it together as a force. And in that way, the fellowship became a reality.
And it just completely changed who I was as a person and where I was going, you know? And simply for that fact alone, it's been the most rewarding thing that's happened in my life.
You get to, you know, see and touch and smell and feel the energy of at least 100 people, but more like 800 people over the course of 15 months in a way that, you know, in most of human life, you don't have that kind of closeness with people.
You know, people got crabby, there were bad days and stuff for everybody, and bad periods, but there was always a kind of a support system, you know? Mostly unspoken, it was just there.
Lifelong friends. There's not one member of the fellowship that I don't think I'll know for the rest of my life.
Those friendships that are so important to the story as well were a reality, and a reality because of what we had to go through together.
This is the biggest low-budget film being made anywhere in the world at this time.
It's the biggest low-budget film being made in the Wellington area.
In the Wellington area. It's the biggest low-budget film being made in the history of the planet.
You know, even though we shot these 3 movies for 15 months, if we just had one unit shooting everything that needed to be shot, we'd be probably going for 6 or 7 years.
We had these many units shooting, often 5 units shooting, sometimes 7 units shooting. Almost always we shot with 2 cameras on each unit.
It was fairly high speed. I mean, Peter's one of those classic sort of people that his capacity to absorb a lot of information I find really amazing. So he's one of those sort of people that can work several shoots at once.
1A was the main unit and the other unit was called 1B. And then it became apparent that even those 2 units were not going to get through this amount of footage, so we created a second unit, which was directed by John Mahaffey. And eventually, as we went along, we realized that the second unit were not going to get through everything that they needed to get through either, so we created a second unit, which was directed by Jeff Murphy.
Pete made it very clear that he couldn't be everywhere that he would like to be at every one time, but the people that were there in his place were ideal. They were the perfect people to be there, and Pete trusted them intrinsically, so we did the same.
Our principal Hobbiton set was in a farm near the town of Matamata, and we shot You know, we shot a lot of the location footage there.
We'd seen beautiful sets before, but this was unbelievable. Because it was there, it was real, it was as we had imagined it. You know, Bag End was there with the massive tree sticking out of the top, coming down, as we'd seen it in various paintings and images before. It was exactly how we'd imagined it.
Hobbiton was an exceptional location, except that it was extremely difficult to access. All the roads were really paths. It was a very fragile landscape, and yet we basically still had to come in with fairly sizable technology. It just required more physical labour to actually work the location.
Today we're keeping the chimneys up and running. There's 47 chimneys in the location, which all have particular secret little ingredient smoke pots in them to keep them up and running. So it looks like there's a little bit of activity happening in the buildings. So, and maha to you too.
Philosophically, as far as what we wanted to do with Hobbiton, since it was the opening of the film, we basically wanted to start off with sort of a very idyllic place, which is very, you know, expressive of a simple lifestyle, a rural lifestyle, where people are actually very much in touch with nature. And I just wanted to make everyone feel like that it was like a holiday destination. People would love to want to go there.
When you're walking throughout the Shire, you could see what an enviable existence it was for the hobbits.
It's excellent. Everything is absolutely a joy to be here.
It's fun. It's something totally different. I think I would have paid money to be a hobbit, but no, it's been great.
Well, it's the 17th of January 2000. It's our first day back on the shoot since Christmas in the new century, and it was also Ian McKellen's first day today.
You're late.
A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.
And it felt like coming home, and that was a good feeling for me, because Gandalf was returning back to an area of Middle-earth that he loved and respected.
No, thank you. We don't want any visitors, well-wishers, or distant relations.
Yes, and what about very old friends?
Of course, once Gandalf walks inside Bag End, then you're into a studio. You're no longer at Matamata, you're several hundred miles away, and you're in a small, confined studio.
Often we filmed in two different scale sets. So Bag End was built, for example, in a large-size scale for Ian Holm to appear in, and a small scale, the Hobbit-size scale, for Ian McKellen to walk through.
And in the smaller one, I, as a normal-sized person, could look enormous, because everything in Bag End was small.
The Bilbo's party, which takes place on the party field, we see the party field at Matamata in the daytime being prepared, but when you actually go to the party at night, you're now inside a studio. You're not in Matamata at all. You're in the middle of the day. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you've got a studio pretending to be a Hobbit party at night.
It would be great to get, with the fireworks, it'd be great to get more applause, you know? We're getting sort of, that, which is nice, it's certainly better. But if we got a bit of, if we got a bit of jumping and actually cheering, more cheering and clapping at each firework burst would be good.
It was great because they had all these extras as hobbits, you know, and this party scene was when they did that, the dance. And something that a lot of people might not have noticed is I play in the band, the Hobbit band. I'm up there with my Hobbit ukulele, whatever it may be.
Bilbo's going to tell a story just like at story time. So we need you guys to be sitting on the mat, just like you do at story time.
Who wants to see some butterflies? Jump up and down, jump up and down. And 1 and 2 and 3 and...
I remember Pete saying to us, this is the real time where you are hobbits, where you behave as hobbits. There's no ulterior motive. You don't know about this mission yet. You're not worried about anything. You're just embracing who you are as young hobbits, you know. So we really just went to town at that point and had some fun. And I remember the day where the firework blows up in our face.
As soon as it goes bang, you've just got to let it go, okay? So
Peter said to us that when we're holding the firework, it will be lifted up by a piece of string, and there'll be like a...
I didn't know. Whoosh! It was your idea.
to just kind of scare us and let the cameraman know when the cut is going to happen for the real explosion. But Billy, being this kind of slightly feminine character that he is, was really quite scared by it and made this girly kind of woo shriek, which I barely got through the take on.
You're supposed to stick it in the ground. Where's in the ground? Outside. That was your idea.
I just get such a fright, and Dom just gave me abuse for it all day.
You're supposed to stick it in the ground.
It is in the ground.
Outside.
That was your idea.
You know, we've been shooting for about 4 months now, and we finally get to start to do things with the villains. Like, we've done a lot of shooting with the hobbits and Aragorn and our heroes, and it's great to finally get the dark part of the story on film to start to set up the sort of the opposition, as it were.
You're putting the pieces together and you're realising that
this is... Yes, I've been saying all the time to myself, in fact, he's linked to his sons now. Ruins.
Yeah.
Almost to myself.
Almost to yourself. Might be quite nice.
Well, it's obviously a big thrill to work with someone like Christopher Lee, who's a bit of a icon, and I mean, I haven't mentioned it to him at this stage, but I've been a big fan of his, obviously, most of my life, and watching Hammer horror double features when I was a kid, and you know, it's just sort of fun and a little bit unbelievable to finally be working with someone like that and having them on the set and directing them, and you know, it's a big thrill.
No, my first day in the garden, remember we got to take 10, which is very unusual with me. I don't say that in an immodest way. I mean, there just isn't time in most films. I meant 10, 11, 12. Surely we got that right. But it was Peter who wanted that line up, that line down, that word, that way, and those words, that way, or whatever. He waited until he got it. And it took a lot of takes sometimes. Well, we got used